All right, guys, this is a little concept review, kind of a modified lecture um, that focuses on the larger concepts. Remember I mentioned that the test questions on the exam, the essay questions, they originate from these larger concepts or these sub-concepts. So what you want to be able to do is provide evidence or provide responses to those concepts. So let's start with the large concept 1.1, key concept 1.1, and this is again the larger main idea. The test question probably wouldn't come from this, it would probably come from the sub-concept, but you want to be familiar with the big idea. So the big idea here is that throughout the Paleo era, remember that's the early human era, humans developed sophisticated technologies and they adapted to different geographical environments as they migrated from Africa to Eurasia, Australasia, and the Americas. Australasia would be Australia, the islands of maybe Indonesia and New Guinea. Sub-concept one, so this is the smaller concept that you might see a test question focus on. So this concept says that archaeological evidence indicates that during the Paleo era, hunter-forager bands of humans gradually migrated from origin in East Africa to Eurasia, Australia, and the Americas, adapting their technology and cultures to new climate regions. So a great example of this is I've seen this on the exam, and they'll give you a map, and they'll ask you, where early man originated from. And the answer is going to be East Africa. And really the last place that they travel as they, extend out of Africa into, Europe and Asia, they sail to the islands in and around Australia, and eventually they either cross the land bridge or sail to the Americas. So that's a great concept that you might see on a multiple choice question. All right, so the supporting evidence, or supporting evidence A, is that humans developed increasingly diverse and sophisticated tools, including the use of fire as they adapted to new environments. Other illustrative examples of this concept would be stone flakes, right, that the Neanderthal man used, and the bolo that was used by the people of Chile, or the Monteverde people. So in addition to fire, we're going to see them use stones for, spears. They're going to use the bolo to hunt. So you want to be familiar with some of these new sophisticated tools. And again, I think stone flakes and the bolo, that's probably enough to remember. All right, so evidence strand B would be that people lived in small groups that structured social, economic, and political activity. And these bands exchanged people, ideas, and goods. The illustrative example of that would be Cro-Magnon man, right? This is one of those small groups that, exchanged ideas and goods. So this is the earliest Homo sapien in Europe. He was known, or this human, this group of humans, they were travelers, they were nomadic. They would establish homes, but depending on the seasons, they would maybe move to warmer climates. They used bone needles to sew fur clothing. Again, small groups, so there'd be 30 to 60 people kind of in a kin or a clan. We talked about these groups were egalitarian. There was no political structure per se. There was leadership. The leader of these small kinships would be, the most intelligent, the most experienced. There was really no need for government or class divisions because these small groups would collaborate and work together to hunt, to defend their community, and to fish. And again, we call this a cooperative society, an egalitarian society. If you ever see a cave painting on a test, that's probably related to the Cro-Magnon man. So there was that, artwork or that communication that they would use. But more importantly, you're probably going to focus on their lifestyle, which was small groups, nomadic, and adjusting to the environment, adapting to the environment, using fire, right? Using the stone flakes, the bone needles. All right, Mungo. The Mungo people were another one of these paleo groups, small groups. They established themselves in Australia around 50,000 BC. We do believe that they were very spiritual because archaeologists have found evidence that of human burial, so there was this belief in afterlife and religion. And I think what's interesting is that we do believe that the Mungo here did travel into New Guinea, these islands up here in New Guinea. This is New Zealand. So they were travelers. Maybe they didn't travel to Africa, but they did travel around this region. So those are the Mungo people. And this is the type of map you'd see on the on the test. Where did the early Paleo people emerge from? The answer is Africa, right? And they're going to travel north, and then they're going to travel east and land bridge, sail to the Americas. The Monteverde people, they're the first group of Native American peoples. We believe that they crossed over by the land bridge or by boat to Chile. They were very, I think, sophisticated. Their homes had kind of organization. They would use poles to divide their home into different rooms. They would heat their homes with fire. They too were nomadic. They were hunters and gatherers. And they did use local plants for medical use. So they were sophisticated in a sense, and they also used those bolos. So that's the Monteverde people. So again, the three groups of people you'd want to remember for the Paleo period would be Cro-Magnon man, the Monteverde people, and the Mungos. All right, key concept 1.2. Again, this is the broad concept, and then you'll have sub-concepts after this. So beginning about 10,000 years ago, some communities adopted sedentism and agriculture, while others pursued hunter-gatherer or hunter-forager and pastoralist lifestyles, different pathways that had significant social and demographic or population ramifications. We're talking about the Paleo, the Neolithic civilizations here. Right, so that's sub-concept 2. The Neolithic Revolution, or the Agricultural Revolution, led to the development of more complex economic and social systems. So now you're going to see civilizations become more sedentary. They're going to stay in one place and farm. All right, so the evidence strands would be that as a response to climatic change, permanent agricultural villages emerged, first in the lands of the Eastern Mediterranean or Mesopotamia. The continuation of that strand would be that agriculture emerges independently in Mesopotamia, the Nile River Valley, the Sub-Saharan African valleys, the Indus River Valley, the Yellow River Valley, Papua New Guinea, Mesoamerica, which is Mexico, and the Andes. So you want to be familiar with these regions and how the people lived in these regions, and that's what we're going to go over now. So again, quickly, a summary of the Neolithic era, around 10,000 to 600 BCE. This is the early Egyptian people, the Babylonian people, the Sumerian people, and they were sedentary. They were still pastoral in some aspects, but you're going to start to see these civilizations not travel to survive, right? They're going to grow corn, they're going to grow wheat, they're going to grow foods that allow for surplus. And this is also known as the agricultural revolution. All right, so be familiar with the components of a complex society. The Paleo people were not that complex, but the people of Egypt were. In these complex societies during the Neolithic era, you're going to see large urban centers, right? Cities like Uruk, 10,000 or more people. Specialized labor. You're not just going to have farmers. You're going to have people that might, domesticate animals, or they might be artisans, or they might farm. You're also going to see a social class system. You're going to see writing systems, and you're going to see surplus of goods, which again allows for that specialized labor. So definitely be able to articulate what a complex society looks like. All right, so again, supporting evidence would be Sumeria. Sumeria is one of those Mesopotamian civilizations around 3000 BC. Southern Mesopotamia, they were, again, sedentary. They were also pastoralists, which meant that they developed domesticated animals like sheep. They are the earliest civilization in the Middle East. So before we have Babylonia, we have the Sumerian people. The region is Mesopotamia. But within Mesopotamia, you have these different groups. Uruk was the large city-state. Again, a large city, 50,000 people. Again, a great example of a complex society. I think we mentioned this. The temples were not only used for religious purposes, but they were used to store food. And because you could store food, there was less need for a large amount of farmers. So people had to learn new jobs. And if you're going to have a surplus of food, you're probably going to have population growth over time. All right, Babylonia would be the the kingdom that follows. Remember, that's Hammurabi's empire. Babylonia emerges in 2200. It kind of encompasses the Sumerian people. He unifies the region, right? So again, they too are sedentary and pastoralist. And again, they are going to have a lot of job specialization due to surplus of food. Hammurabi's code is another concept, but obviously, that is important to this society in terms of unifying the people. All right, Egypt, located on the Nile River Valley. The river is going to give birth to the people in this region, right? It's going to help irrigate their lands, their farm. But the Egyptians were also pastoralist in addition to being sedentary. And we're going to see the Egyptian kingdoms emerge around 6000 BC. What are the products they're going to grow? Wheat and barley. They're going to domesticate donkeys and cattle. They're going to mine for copper used for jewelry and tools. So a very diverse economy. They did struggle with desertification around 5000 BC, but that kind of forced them to borrow irrigation techniques from the Sumerians. So they did build canals to help bring that water from the Nile River to their farms and fields. They're also going to develop their own wheels, their own plows, and bronze making from the Sumerians. So the Sumerians are very important. They're going to kind of help the Egyptian civilization grow with some of their tools. All right, in China, civilization emerges along the Yellow River and the Yangtze River. Like the Nile, these rivers provided irrigation supplies, great soil. And because of that, you're going to see cities like Shang cities emerge, right? Remember, a common concept is that a lot of these cities were very organized. They were laid out in grids. If you remember in India, we're going to talk about Mohenjo-daro. But, the Chinese cities were also very organized. What are some of the products they're going to be producing? Ivory, silk, and bronze weapons. All right, in South America, the Shavan people were very important. Again, another one of these complex societies, at least in America. They're going to kind of follow, the Monteverde people. The Shavan people, they had large temples for religious purposes. They were a coastal society, so they did rely on seafood, but they did have enough land for corn growth. You're going to see the building of bridges and roads, which kind of shows that there was kind of a government that could organize the people to come together to build these things. So evidence of kind of urban planning and infrastructure in a sense. The Shavan people would eventually influence the Inca people. So I apologize, actually. The Monteverde people were in Chile. The Shavan people would be modern-day Peru. And they're going to domesticate the llama. Don't forget the llama. The llama is going to allow the Shavan people to transfer or transport food, wool, and kind of engage in local regional trade, not necessarily continental trade. All right, let's get to India, the Indus River Valley. India kind of emerges around 2600 BCE. It's during the Vedic period. The Indus River Valley would encompass modern India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. So remember, early residents of India were very isolated. They were surrounded by the Himalayan and Hindu Kush mountains and the Indian Ocean. As time would go on, migrants from Europe would kind of come to this region and they would mix with local indigenous people. Early Indian cities had, these sophisticated infrastructures. Remember the cities Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, like the Shang cities. They were laid out in grids. These cities had drinking water facilities, bathing facilities, and even sewers. Again, more evidence that there was some kind of government that could put people to work to build these things. So you want to be able to kind of remember that concept of urban planning. We do believe that the people of the Indus River Valley were trading pretty far away. We found goods from the Indus River Valley, bronze, goods with seals, Indian seals found in Mesopotamia. And we know that there was bronze materials from Mesopotamia that were later found in the Indus River Valley. So there was long distance trade occurring, during this Neolithic period, at least between India and Mesopotamia. All right, so evidence strand B, people in each region domesticated locally available plants and animals, and examples of that would be sheep, right? The llama, the shaven, the shaven would use the llama. Cattle and wheat were obviously, or at least cattle was the domesticated animal that perhaps the Egyptians and Mesopotamians would domesticate, and obviously wheat would be wheat and barley would be the farm products that are going to be grown. So just kind of be able to identify some of those important domesticated animals: the llama, cattle, and eventually the horse, right? Sheep, goat, any of those animals would be great. All right, evidence strand C, pastoralism developed in Afro-Eurasian grasslands, affecting the environment in a variety of ways. The most famous pastoral group, the Mongols. But pastoralism was evident in the Middle East and Africa as well. And again, a pastoralist, you're going to be raising or herding livestock, llama, cattle, sheep. Like the Mongols, pastoral communities are going to be migratory. Even though the Egyptians weren't migratory, the Mongols sure were. So if you're thinking about an important pastoral group, always go to the Mongols later on. Don't forget the negative impact of pastoralists, right? These domesticated animals are going to really destroy the environment, eating the grass, which could, result in environmental problems, dust storms, for example. Overuse of the farmland, which would eventually destroy it. So there was always a negative impact in terms of, even farming, right? You're going to abuse the soil over time. And, landscapes and forests, you're going to cut those down for pastures. In these communities, as we remember, the Mongols, women and men did share tasks in these pastoral communities, and they would share resources. So even though the Mongols aren't a civilization, early Mongol groups are in existence in Asia, and they're pastoral. All right, evidence strand D, agricultural communities had to work cooperatively to clear land and create water control systems needed for crop production, drastically affecting environmental diversity. Illustrative examples of that would be the Nile River providing irrigation. Obviously, the Egyptians borrowing irrigation techniques like the building of canals from the Sumerian people. Dams, dikes, and canals were built, obviously, by the Sumerian people along the Tigris and Euphrates. Early Chinese civilizations would use iron tools to build dikes. A dike is kind of a dam that would allow water to come out gradually, and they too had iron plows. So you never know if you see a primary source, China and iron plows. That's a great example of improving agricultural ability. All right, so subconcept 2, agriculture and pastoralism began to transform human societies. So the evidence strand is that because of pastoralism, because of an agricultural revolution, you had more reliable and abundant food supplies, which led to an increase in population, which led to specialization of labor, including new social classes of artisans, warriors, and the development of an elite class. Illustrative examples of that would be in Mesopotamia, right? You had a social class system where, the ruling families were on top, the farmers and the workers were more in the middle, and then at the bottom would be slaves. How did you know if someone was wealthy? Well, the poor lived in small homes of wood brick. The wealthy royal families or the aristocracy would live in nicer fired brick homes with many rooms, kitchens, even party rooms for lavish meals and parties. Slaves were usually prisoners or debtors, and they would perform the hard labor. They would be building those ziggurats. Social class system in Egypt was very similar as well. The priests Ruling family members, nobles would be on top, or landowners. The artisans and the farmers would be in the middle, and finally slaves on the bottom. In Egypt, there was very little mobility. You might be equal under the law, but you were not going to be able to obtain a lot of wealth if you were a small farmer or have the same political influence. All right, evidence strand B. Technological innovations led to improvements in agricultural production, trade, and transportation. Illustrative examples of those technological innovations would be in Mesopotamia, the development of cuneiform. That would be the writing system, right? Markings on clay pots to keep track of animal trade. The people of Mesopotamia developed a number system based on 60, and they also implemented early calendars and a sundial to keep track of time. They were also known for their bronze innovations, bronze plows, the wheel, the bronze sickle. So, these are obviously innovations that are going to help farming. That wheel would eventually make its way to Europe and Asia, and eventually it would be used on a cart, right? So we'll give the Sumerian and Babylonian people credit for these great agricultural innovations. All right, what about Egypt? What are those, innovations that they're famous for? Hieroglyphics. Obviously, that's their writing system. They built these amazing pyramids and temples with some, phenomenal engineering systems. They too were known for their mathematical skills. They developed a number system based on 10. They're also the innovators of fractions and whole numbers, and they were great medical experts. Their knowledge of the human body was very advanced, and medical advancements for them would be amputations. They would set broken bones. That's what happened to me recently, right? I had a broken bone set. And they would use local herbs and plants to relieve pain and alleviate asthma. All right, what about the Chinese? The Zhou dynasty, we're going to see the development of the crossbow, the iron sword, cavalry systems, or armies that utilize domesticated animals like the horse. Iron plows, obviously, that would help farming, and irrigation systems. And, we know that roads were starting to be built. Maybe not, the Silk Roads are starting to emerge. They actually are discovered during the Han Dynasty, but, we're going to see the building of those roads early on during the Zhou Dynasty. All right, evidence strand C, patriarchal forms of social organization develop in both pastoralist and agrarian societies. So, what were the gender roles in Mesopotamia? Patriarchal, men dominated. Men were, merchants, traders, scribes, astronomers. Women could be, though, merchants, traders, and scribes and astronomers. So there was some opportunity in Mesopotamia. Definitely a more advanced civilization when it came to women's opportunities. Women could enter into written contracts, and they were entitled to a share of their father's property upon his death. However, if they participated in adultery, punishment was death. So they did have some legal rights. They could initiate divorce. So, on the spectrum of women's rights, they're probably higher up, maybe not quite equal to Mongol women, but probably, probably had more rights than, European women, for example, going forward. Definitely more rights than Asian women. In Egypt, a similar situation to how women were treated in Mesopotamia. But we always remember that in Egypt, women were political leaders. Hatshepsut is the only female pharaoh. She reigned between 1473 and 1458. Older women often served as regents when a pharaoh was too young, like King Tut. So an older woman would kind of govern until that pharaoh was old enough to govern himself. So in terms of, the structure, it's probably going to be very similar to Mesopotamia. But again, we're going to add Hatshepsut and the fact that women in Egypt could rule. Israel, we're at the bottom end, right? Women in Israel, Hebrew women lacked pretty much all rights. They could not inherit property. They had very few marriage rights. They could not initiate divorce. And again, their role was going to be at home and farming. Very limited rights. So I think you'd put them on the lower end. of the patriarchal, or the higher end of the patriarchal scale. All right, so key concept 1.3 almost done. The last key concept: the appearance of the first urban societies 5,000 years ago lay the foundations for the development of complex civilizations. These civilizations share significant social, political, and economic characteristics. The subconcepts are basically, you want to be familiar with the early civilizations. We kind of went over that. Now we're going to focus more on the political aspects of these societies. So you want to understand the political structure of Mesopotamia and Egypt and India. So let's go into that. Evidence strand A: states were powerful new systems of rule that mobilized surplus labor and resources over large areas, and rulers of early states often claimed divine connections to power. Rulers also relied on the support of the military, religious, or aristocratic elites. All right, so let's talk about the political structure of Sumeria. There were priests, and then eventually a king would rule, and kings were seen as high priests. So these are like theocratic civilizations, right? There was a blending of religion and politics. Warfare between cities was very common, hence why walls were built around these cities. Bronze weapons were utilized in warfare, and we know this from the art that shows these battle victories. In Babylonia, we're going to always think about Hammurabi's code, right? Hammurabi emerges as a ruler, and to unify his empire, he creates his legal code, right? An eye for an eye. It establishes the treatment of slaves, rules for divorce, punishments for crime, interest rates on loan. So it's not establishing necessary ethical behavior. It's not establishing religious Sharia law. It's just basically establishing more, kind of guidelines for how people should, deal with certain aspects of society. Hammurabi was not equal in terms of, legal rights. There were different punishments for different social classes. So, for example, a commoner or a peasant might have a harsher punishment than someone who committed the same crime from a royal family. An eye for an eye basically you can only apply that to someone on your class level. So again, a commoner could not gain revenge for a crime if it was conducted by a landowner, for example. Fines were in the form of silver or grain. We don't have that currency yet. All right, what's the political structure of Egypt? What does it look like? Remember, there are three kingdoms. There's the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. What you want to remember is that Egypt was also a theocracy, right? The pharaoh not only was the political ruler, but he held tremendous religious power as well. He was seen by the people as being immortal, and hence why pyramids were established to help him get to the afterlife. Egypt was highly centralized with large bureaucracies. Governors would rule districts. Governments relied heavily on scribes, so there are those government positions. There was a lot of civil unrest early on, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. One of the first kings is King Menes, but again, I would focus more on the fact that, Egypt was a theocracy, and it was a fairly large centralized government with different offices and positions like governors, viziers, and scribes. And the pharaoh was atop the political structure. In the Middle Kingdom, you might want to remember Mentuhotep. He unifies Egypt. Remember, there was kind of a lower part and an upper part. And he's going to establish, again, a very centralized government. He's going to construct irrigation projects, expand borders. Again, great evidence of what centralized governments do. He's going to expand Egypt's wealth by invading Nubia, which is an African kingdom south of Egypt. Eventually, though, Syrian invaders would conquer Egypt, so there would be kind of a break in terms of this unified Egyptian empire. All right, so that gets us to the New Kingdom. Definitely remember Ramses the Great. He's going to kind of restore traditional polytheistic religion after Akhenaten Akhenaten called for the worship of one God. He is going to expand the size of Egypt into southwestern Asia. He's going to build statues and temples based on his likeness. Again, there's some urban planning or use of government power to build something. Eventually, the New Kingdom would decline, and this would be the last time Egypt would be independent of someone else's rule. Different groups like the Persians and Romans would eventually take over, and they really wouldn't gain any independence until the modern era. All right, let's go to government structure in China. You guys are pretty much experts at this. China was also ruled by a king who believed he was given that position through some kind of divine intermediary actions. War was very common during the Shang dynasty. Those bronze weapons were utilized quite a bit. The Zhou dynasty is the dynasty that's probably more important to remember. Around 1027 BC, it's the longest dynasty in Chinese history. It's during this dynasty that this mandate of heaven is established. It's the idea that God gave the ruler power. It was used to justify the overthrow of the Shang king. However, a ruler could lose his power if he was corrupt or greedy. Under the Zhou dynasty, there was a lot of expansion. There were 100 Chinese territories, all ruled by an ally or relative of the king. So there was kind of there was a central government, but then there were regional governments as well. City-states were common. Each city-state had to pay a tax to the king, right, almost like a tribute, and provide soldiers to the central government. And again, we're going to see the basic foundations of feudalism, where a local lord would give taxes and provide military assistance to a king. It's during this dynasty that we see the Warring States period. And as a result of the Warring States period, remember, we see these new ideas on how to govern. And it's during the Zhou dynasty that legalism emerges, right? An authoritarian political system. And in order to maintain control and order, a ruler had to be not mean, but had to rule authoritatively. It was the state over the individual because it was believed that human nature was naturally evil, and you need an authoritarian leader to kind of govern the state effectively. So that's legalism. Eventually, the Zhou dynasty would decline. These regions would stop sending taxes and soldiers over time, and that led to kind of bankruptcy. Eventually, local leaders would take control of the iron and bronze areas, and that would lead to the next dynasty, which would be the Qin dynasty. All right, so substrand B, as states grew and competed for resources, the more favorably situated had greater access to resources, produced more surplus food, and experienced growing populations, enabling them to undertake territorial expansion and conquer surrounding states. So what's the illustrative example of this? Just examples of warfare. So we talked earlier that local groups, including the Egyptians, would use chariot warfare, where they would use those domesticated animals, those bronze weapons. The Assyrians were known for their iron weapons and their professional soldiering, their cavalries, and their machineries to attack towns. They were very cruel. They were a pain in the neck to the Egyptian people. But we start to see, again, a new type of warfare, a more advanced warfare, using more advanced weapons and technologies like chariot warfare. And that's what you want to remember, the new methods of warfare. In Egypt, in terms of expansion, we mentioned Mentuhotep, who invaded Nubia, and Ramses the Great, who expanded Egyptian influence into Southwest Asia. So whether it was Egypt, or even Hammurabi, there was always expansion, going into other regions and taking over. All right, evidence strand C. Pastoralists were often developers and disseminators of new weapons and modes of transportation that transformed warfare in agrarian civilizations. The Hittites, right, in modern-day Syria, the Hittites were also were known for using iron, which was much more durable. They also developed a two-horse chariot. Again, if you don't remember Hittite or Assyrian, what you want to remember is that the idea of the chariot as a form of warfare is developing, and the use of iron weapons that were more durable. And that's probably what I would remember. Not necessarily the specific group. The Hittites and the Assyrians. They kind of came from the same region, Syria, but two different groups of Syrian people. They were eventually defeated by an unknown people, possibly seafaring around 1200. So again, what do you take from this? New weapons, right? New modes of transportation, iron weapons, and the chariot, right? The chariot. All right, subconcept 3, culture played a significant role in unifying states through laws, language, literature, religion, myths, and art. The substrand is that early civilizations developed monumental architecture and urban planning. So what are some examples of that? Would be the Shang cities, the Egyptian Great Pyramid, right? Those pyramids were used to preserve, or at least help the pharaoh get to the next life. In order to build those pyramids, you needed a lot of, specialization and some kind of organized government. The cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro had, infrastructure. These cities were very advanced. Water systems, bathing facilities, sewers. And again, this is evidence of some kind of central government that could coordinate the building of these things. The Olmec people and the Shavan people, they were building pyramids and temples as well. The Olmec also had these huge, large stone heads. So if you see that, we're talking about early Mexican or Aztec peoples. And again, that's the king organizing a labor force to build these things. So try to remember a few of these examples of urban planning and monumental architecture. All right, substrand B, evidence substrand B, systems of record keeping arose independently, and writing and record keeping subsequently spread. So what are the forms of writing? In Mesopotamia, we had cuneiform. In India, you had Sanskrit, hieroglyphics, which was similar to cuneiform in Egypt, and obviously scribes are going to be the government officials that are going to do the writing and the interpretation. All right, substrand C, states developed legal codes that reflected existing hierarchies and facilitated the rule of government over the people. Hammurabi's Code in Babylonia, the Hebrew Bible, the Ten Commandments, and the Torah in Israel. All right, new religion, substrand D. Beliefs that developed in this period, including the Vedic religion, right, early Hinduism, Hebrew monotheism, and Zoroastrianism, continue to have strong influences in later periods. So what was Judaism? It was founded by Abraham around 2000 BCE. He is believed to be the father of Islam and Christianity, and it was believed that God chose him to lead his people out of Mesopotamia, travel to the Mediterranean, and establish a Hebrew kingdom. His story is documented in the Hebrew Bible, and again, he is initiating the belief of monotheism, and that's a monumental change during this time period, right? This is the first, region or kingdom or civilization that does not believe in polytheism. And again, the Ten Commandments are kind of their ethical code, not a legal code, but more of an ethical code. Because of their monotheistic beliefs, Jews were usually isolated from other polytheistic religious groups. All right, Mesopotamia was polytheistic, multiple gods. Temples were used for offerings. It was believed that God would punish humans for bad behavior, hence why you might have drought or war or some other kind of, natural disaster. But the idea of an afterlife was not something that the people of Mesopotamia believed, and that was more common in Egypt, right? So this is a ziggurat. In Egypt, again, they were polytheistic. They did believe in an afterlife. How do we know? Because of the mummification process. They would use statues and idols and prayers and offerings to kind of appease their gods, like Ra, the sun god. All right, China, during the Shang dynasty, we know that they were polytheistic. Eventually Buddhism and Islam and Christianity would emerge in China, but China never has a single religion, So early on, though, China's polytheistic. Remember the oracle bones? Oracle bones were used by the Shang ruler to forecast the future. It was also a way to record information on turtle shells, right? So it's more evidence of language, religion, and writing. right? So oracle bones were, I wouldn't call it religious, but more of a spiritual custom, right? To forecast the future. The cracks on the bone would help the shaman or the priest understand what was going to happen down the road. All right, India, right? So remember, India is an isolated region, but eventually Aryan peoples from Eurasia would move to India, and with them brought their Aryan religious poems or hymns, and these were called Vedas. The famous Veda was the Rig Veda, and it basically just established kind of behavior and rituals to multiple gods. Eventually, we're going to see the emergence of Upanishad texts, and again, these are like just these are religious beliefs that are written down. The Upanishad texts combine the Vedas with local indigenous beliefs, and it's out of the Upanishad text that we have the early examples of Hinduism, right? The idea of Brahma, that the whole point is to do your duty, perform your dharma, and to escape that cycle of life, right? And eventually join the Brahma, or attain the Maska or eternal peace. And this is important because we see religion connected to social class, right? If you're in a lower caste system, you're not anywhere near, obtaining moksha. You have to perform your duty, right? You have to do what your social class or caste expects you to do. And again, the goal, like Buddhism, is to escape the cycle of life. So the Upanishad texts outline the early caste system, which eventually forms the basis of Hinduism. All right, guys, that's it. Again, take notes. Maybe, go back and focus on certain parts that you want to really nail down. All right, thanks.